see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and today I'm here with Fred Arment, and I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you for joining me for this dialogue on how we can build a culture of empathy and peace.
Yes, thank you very much, Edwin, and hello to everybody. Looking forward to this.
And so I thought I'd just introduce you a bit. I've got your Facebook page up here, which I'll show, and it looks like you're a fan of black T-shirts and sailboats.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. I like black clothing and red, and I have other colors too. But sailboats are kind of an avocation that I didn't realize I was going to get into. I never felt the call to sea, but then I bought a sailboat, and boom, I was just totally taken with it, and went off for 7 years, 7 winters to the Caribbean and the Keys, and now I have trouble scheduling meetings.
Well, that's great. Well, so the other thing you do, which is you're president and executive director of the International Cities of Peace, and I'll show that web page up on the screen here. So can you tell me a little bit about that organization and maybe how you got started with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Cities of Peace is probably a 100-year-old term. Actually, thousands of years old. Jerusalem itself, the name is derived from City of Peace. Salem, we have a Salem, and most people have a Salem Avenue in their town. That is a derivative of peace in Arabic and Hebrew. So there's a lot of things that have come together so that the City of Peace movement is resonating with people all around the world. Everybody understands what that is. So we started in 2009, an international dimension for Cities of Peace, and so far we have nearly 30 cities that have started initiatives, grassroots initiatives in their area, and then there's Cities of Peace that are historical, such as The Hague and Geneva.
Yeah, so this is something that you're like a leader in this movement, or would you say?
Yeah, it's an association of Cities of Peace. Leadership's a strange thing in the peace movement, but what we've done is tried to not press our agenda on the cities, but let them develop their initiative in the way that they would like to develop it. So there's no agenda-driven, no philosophy that we're trying to have people ascribe to. The only thing we do is we have a guideline, which we use so that people can feel comfortable with it a little bit, but it's the Culture of Peace, UNESCO Culture of Peace, which there's 8 tenets, such as democracy, human rights, women's freedom, communications, things like that. Things that are pretty normal for people around the world to ascribe to, even though it's not really true that they live those principles.
And so the third part is your book, The Elements of Peace, which you just brought out. So you've been thinking about this for quite a while.
Right.
And intensively. Yeah,
we had a great opportunity. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, which is, for your worldwide audience, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and it's a town of about 1 million people, the large metropolitan area. But it was a place where the Clinton administration brought the warring parties in from the Bosnian War, the 3 presidents of the warring parties to Dayton, Ohio. And there was a treaty struck, and most people might know about this, the 1995 Dayton Peace Accords. And since it was one of the few actual treaties that stopped the war, there was 100,000 people killed. The warring parties came to Dayton. They signed a treaty. The killing stopped. And that is something to be thought about for children and people around the world. So that we have a bit of responsibility in keeping that idea, that treaty alive. So we started the Dayton International Peace Museum in 2003. And so the idea of what became the book came out of creating an exhibit based on how people approach peace. And empathy, for instance, is in the book in quite a hallowed place. It's one of the virtues of peace, as we term it. There's 30 methods, such as diplomacy, statecraft, humanitarianism, civil disobedience, all of these 30 ways that we work for peace. I came to realize that the way we work for peace is related to the character traits that we have as human beings, as individuals. And some people have a high degree of empathy, whether it's neurological or learned. A lot of people have a high degree of empathy. And what that does is that creates a space for them to follow through with how they create peace in their own lives and in the world.
Well, I see on the cover you've got some, kind of famous people: Martin Luther King, let's see, Mother Teresa, and Einstein. So, are you kind of referencing kind of leaders in the field, or?
Well, I went back and forth about that. It would be nice if I could put all of humanity, 7 billion people, on the front cover. But since that's impossible, we have these heroes of peace. And the heroes are no more amazing people than everyone in your audience right now. Everyone has their traits and their characteristics and their virtues and their values, and that's what they put into it. The people that we associate with the peace movement, such as Einstein, who was a pacifist, Wangari Maathai, who's an environmentalist, each of the 30 methods that we show in the book has an important story. And that story is usually associated with the person who drove the action. Mm-hmm. For instance, Wangari Maathai, it wasn't that peace and environmentalism were that closely associated until 2004, when Wangari Maathai got the Nobel Peace Prize. And when that happened, all of a sudden, the environmental movement and the peace movement were inextricably linked. And that came out of Wangari Maathai's personal characteristics that led her to work for peace.
Well, I'm glad to have a chance to talk to you about this, because the relationship between empathy, peace, and nonviolence is something I've really been wanting to look at, because I know there's a whole community around nonviolence. There's a whole community around peace. I mean, the peace movement has been around for quite a while. And what I'm trying to do is get a kind of an empathy movement going, which is, kind of organize people around the value of empathy. And so the relationship, between these three different movements or values or forces, or whatever you want to call them, is, something that really interests me. So kind of one way I like to kind of frame the discussion is around metaphor. And so I was wondering, if what your metaphor of empathy and for peace is. Like, typically, empathy is described as the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes. And for me, empathy is like a cornucopia. And I'm wondering, do you have a metaphor like that? Like, what is empathy like? Yeah, it's a visual kind of a picture.
I think it's the opening of a door for me. And, when you open a door, there's two things that happen. One is that you let in the outside, and you also are able to see through to the outside. So there's a two-way replicating energy there. And I think that empathy gives us the ability to detect the outside through that open door. And once you detect it, then you can find a little bit of passion in it. You can find the suffering, the word empathy is very striking because the roots of it go back, as probably most people that talk about empathy on this program. Basically, it has to do with suffering with something, and the idea that empathy gives you a little insight into the other person. It also gives you insight into yourself, and I think that empathy is one of the most important characteristics you can have, and I think it can be learned, and I think it can be fostered in our children. But there are some people who come into the world, I think, with a high capacity for empathy.
So empathy is like kind of opening a door then between here you are and I am. Actually, I have you on split screen. So it's like this door opening and I'm able to see you right on a split screen.
Right.
And
closing the door would not be empathy.
Not be empathy. So you're saying that some people are kind of born with open doors, or have are born with the door ajar, somewhat ajar already. Other people, maybe they're open with the door, open, and then it kind of like shuts. And so we're kind of playing with that metaphor there. So so that's the metaphor of empathy. And I might mention the suffering with part is actually more related to compassion. The origination of the word empathy was actually from the arts. It was a philosopher, a German philosopher, who wanted to describe the experience of opening the door to a work of art. And you know how when you look at a work of art, you feel your way into it? It's like first you might, like if I look at a Van Gogh, I first feel, this beauty. But the longer I look, I start seeing sadness and sorrow, underlying it. So it's like I'm feeling my way into it. The doors are kind of opening, to use your metaphor. So, so that's absolutely. Just to be, just to really ground that. Because I think about this all the time. So,
so the idea of going to a museum and walking through. There was once an exhibit that I went through that had works of art. Usually they put works of art from the same time period or the same, type of art in the same room. But this was a huge exhibition of art throughout time. It had some things from, 1,500 years ago and 1,000 years ago and 500 years ago. And it was interesting because I, started out as a history major in college to go through and try to figure out what the era was when that artwork was done, and I tried to do it within 50 years, being the history buff. But what happened was there was some periods of time that I had feeling for, and it's very interesting that you're doing research on this, and other people are doing research on this, because at a certain point we'll be able to measure, I think, our reaction to paintings and people and things like that, and figure out what we have empathy for. And some people resonate with the 1500s. Some people, turn of the century, Victorian era. And what is it about our uniqueness that we resonate and have empathy for different time periods and different people, and different cultures, and different political philosophies, spirituality, faith-based? All of that we have a resonating quality called empathy with, and that's how we open the door, and that's how we learn more about it.
So for different people, we have the door open at different levels for different time periods. We have, so this door, and then we're going to get out the ruler and kind of be able to measure how much the door is open, I guess. It's kind of the measurements that you're kind of talking about. Let's get some empirical evidence here for how far the door is open.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And do you just blow the doors off when you have, the thunderbolt strikes?
Oh yeah.
But
oh yeah.
I think that this is a really good example of why we need toleration in the world.
Before we get into that, could I just finish with these? I like to set up the metaphors in terms of a metaphor for peace. Do you have a metaphor of what peace is like for you?
Well, personally, it's so much. Just like you spend your time on empathy. I spend my time on peace. So it's a very, very complex feeling that I have. A feeling that's pervasive in my life. So sailboating, I would say, that feeling of, you have the engine on and you're out and you put the sails up and suddenly the wind catches and you turn off the engine. And there's nothing but the wind and the water and the sailboat. That gives me a great feeling of peace and serenity. So
Okay, so peace is like just sailing, and you kind of catch the wind, and you're just kind of in harmony with the wind on your sailboat.
Yeah.
And it's just like
I
that.
would say, yeah, nature is probably top on my list of how I seek peace.
And what would be a metaphor for the opposite of empathy? I mean, what is the opposite? Do you see closed doors? I'm just kind of speculating here, but
yeah, isolation. Mark Twain said that traveling was the way to end bigotry and intolerance and all of those things that we associate with why we don't have peace in the world. And I think that you stay behind closed doors. You don't travel. I think that's why social networking and Facebook. We learn a lot about what people have for breakfast, but it also has an extraordinary capability for traveling and opening doors, and that's why I think that it's important to us. It's not just a computer screen. That's computer screen right now. It's sending me. Is it California? Or are you
California, Berkeley area?
Oh, yeah. I'm. Right now I have a portal open to California, and I'm learning things, and so it's this window that we have. It's like a wormhole between time periods. So, the idea of opening a door, the idea of closing doors, staying isolated, all that has to do with how we get to be peaceful. And I think that there's a starting point for everybody. We each have these traits that we're born with, and that we learn, and that we gain from being around other people, and we enrich ourselves with those virtues. And empathy. Some people say that's the door to having compassion. And when you're with empathy, you're with suffering, you're with compassion, with passion. All of those things are routes into other areas.
Yeah, you need to open the door before you can see someone suffering. You can have the door closed and see your own suffering, I guess, pretty clearly.
Yeah.
So,
you got a mirror,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a mirror only reflects back, your notions. But I think the idea is that all of us don't have 100% empathy. If we did, that would be fantastic. But someone who has an inability to feel empathy might have a tremendous virtue of initiative or friendliness, or there's all of these things that people go into the world with, and I think empathy is a really strong one that enables people to use whatever they have for not only personal gain but for gain worldwide.
Yeah. So, we've got the sense of the door kind of opening, and you're seeing others. And how does that? Other thing I like to do is kind of ground it in a felt experience. Because I really got the felt experience of peace. I can just imagine you out there sailing, turning off that engine, and just that relaxation, and it's like the beauty and the nature, and I can just feel it when you talk about that. And what is your experience, your felt experience of opening that door of empathy? What does it feel like in your body?
Well, I think it makes you a happier person, and I think you have a certain amount of tension and fear that comes from isolation. It comes from many reasons, but but empathy allows you to get outside yourself, and it relieves the fear that we feel. So it's a less tense environment when you have empathy. So there's always a relationship between what's better for other people and what's better for yourself. I mean, there's a reciprocating flow there, and I think that empathy allows you to feel less fear, and it also allows you to be doing actions that lessen other people's fear. So it's a gateway virtue, we'll say.
It's a gateway virtue to lessening fear. Then sounds like So it's something that reduces fear, and I guess the positive of that is, what's the opposite of fear? Is relaxation, calmness.
Reason. So
reason.
Well, reason. In other words, the fear has a tendency to create, negative feelings like paranoia and anger and hate and all of those things. That those are all created by the fears that we have, that we're not going to meet our needs.
Yeah.
So I think that lessening the fear and there's a whole level of fear in this world, and the more we can reduce the tension and lessen the fear. So there's ways that we can learn empathy, I think. Nonviolent communication techniques of nonviolent communication at BC, probably people have been on your program to speak about that.
Have you used that, or is that something?
We have. We did it when we were at the museum. There was quite a lot of tension. You'd think there was a peace organization would be free of tension. Well, it's not. Everybody knows, who's been in the peace movement, that there's just as much tension created around organizations as anywhere else. So there was a couple of people who began teaching nonviolent communications, and it's very difficult because it's a process, and it has to be replicated over and over, so that it becomes an experience that leads to a habit. And so once you turn empathy into a habit, that's where you can live having passion with others and be able to turn that into action. So
it's one way of learning how to open that door. I mean, there's a lot of ways of opening the door, and that's kind of one nice process for opening it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You notice I kind of stick with the metaphors. I like to frame the discussion. This is my new experiment, to kind of frame the discussion around the metaphor. Yeah. So I hope that works for you, and it's not imposing or anything.
I never really thought about that metaphor before, but it's very good, and I think that those metaphors are one ways that we learn. We learn from stories, we learn from metaphors, and I think the opening of the door is used over time as a metaphor for lots of things. But I think empathy, I've never read many more particular that the opening of the door was a great metaphor for that, but it is.
Yeah. So what do you think are like the blocks to opening that door? I'm just thinking of a squeaky door. Did you ever have a door where it's like you got to oil it a little bit? Maybe that oiling is the compassionate communication. Pouring a little oil on that squeaky door hinge. I mean, So from your book, what does your book show about opening that door? How do we open that door of empathy?
I think the relationship between, one of the things that the book describes is a virtuoso of peace. And a virtuoso is an expert. And so the virtuoso of peace, what would a virtuoso of peace be? Well, he or she would have certain characteristics that would give that person the ability to do peacemaking in society and for themselves. So what is the process of that? So you come into the world and you have certain characteristics and certain traits. You know, you get them from your mother, you get them from your father, you get them from your grandparents. And so we come into the world with our capabilities, our unique capabilities. And then we go to school, we learn from the grandparents, and then we start broadening those skills that we find, those traits. And pretty soon, because of something your grandmother said or something a friend says, you start to value certain things. You value integrity. You value morality. You value people who have great initiative. And all of a sudden, those things come into your character. So you have traits, and you start to value things. And then what happens is you start to find the skills. You start to hone your skills. And that's nonviolent communication. As soon as you start to do the process of nonviolent communication, you start to hone that skill, and it becomes a habit. And then that becomes your virtue. So you start with the characteristics and traits. You start to value things. You move it into the skill zone, and it becomes habits. And then you become, you embody the virtue of empathy, or you embody the virtue of honesty. And then you take those things that you value and those virtues that you embrace, and then that becomes who you are as a person and how you're going to function in this world. And when you are on your deathbed and you look over your life, then you will see certain things that you've done throughout your life that support those things that you value. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the virtues of peace and how we can become virtuosos within our own capability and with our own individual characteristics.
Yeah, so you're kind of like laying out like that. How do we get to that point, to that sense of harmony that you have with the sailboat and harmony? Because like with sailing, it's like you're not fighting against the wind, right? It's like you're kind of like one with the wind, and there's this great sense of, it's just like ballooning, I guess, too. It's like there's no noise because you're totally in harmony with the existing. And you're saying, well, how do you kind of get to that state of being? And these are there's qualities that you can nurture to bring you to that state of that harmony and peace.
And most of us, I think, choose a meditative practice. And when I say meditative practice, I'm thinking a more expansive definition than sitting down for 30 minutes and meditating. My writing, I write every morning. I have written every morning except for a few days for 25, 30 years. If I don't write in the morning, I get very nervous and it ruins my day. That is my meditative practice, the writing. Some people walk in nature, some people do artwork, some people do plumbing. That's their art, that's their meditative practice. And all of a sudden, you have people like Andrew Newberg, who you might be familiar with. He did the brain scans. He did brain scans of a nun and saw the neurological activity in certain parts of the brain when they did prayer in the rosary. Mm-hmm. And then he took brain scans of a Buddhist monk doing meditation and found that their neurological activity was the same during that time. And there's a lessening of space and time during that process. So what people do in their spiritual meditative practices is that they lose track of time and they lose a sense of space and they achieve a sense of unity, and that makes them feel very calm and it makes them feel very peaceful. So I keep bringing up toleration. That's why a nun and a monk, it's the same thing. I believe it's a lessening of the of space and time and feeling a unity. And so when I'm on a sailboat, that's exactly the same thing. There's a feeling of unity with nature, with everything around me, and that's the idea that that what we do, the unique meditative practice, leads to a sense of peace and harmony.
Hmm. Well, that unity, I mean, that's another value I hear out there, the unity kind of movement. And for me, that unity happens through opening that door of empathy and kind of that empathic mirroring that can happen. Like, people, when you start mirroring someone, you can kind of get into a state of kind of connection of this resonance where you almost become like one with them. And,
Yeah.
that in fact, you and I are both wearing black now. So there's a little bit, and we could both mirror each other. We both have a cup, right? So,
yeah, that's right.
We're
in sync.
Yeah, you can kind of get in sync, and you can feel a sense of unity with sync. And there's a whole science of, animals working in herds and so forth. They become that. It's like, and it happens at this I don't know, conscious or unconscious or whatever level, where it's like our body is just doing it without us really thinking about it. We kind of feel that resonance.
Right.
And
yeah, I wrote a book, came out in 2005, called Backbeat, a novel of physics, and that went into that whole process where there's this backbeat that we have, this churning of nature, and we have this, we're all made of waves, everything's made of waves, and there's this natural flow that we constrict by fear. And I think that that people are starting to understand a little more that quantum physics isn't just for physicists trying to figure out, how to send something around an accelerator tube. It has to do with who we are and what we are, and if we can get down to that level. But I think maybe where you're headed, if I can.
Yeah, please do speculate. Yeah, great. I love speculation, especially about me.
yeah. Well, Edwin has this idea of where we may be on an evolutionary track. The idea that we're all individuals and that we all have our spiritual practices. If we decide to do that. We go to the Catholic Church and we pray. We go to the temple. We do all of these different spiritual practices in order to find that sense of unity with God, unity with each other. And so, what you're seeming to be doing is saying that empathy is a consensus value among all people, that if we are able to lift empathy up and live with empathy, so that it's not just a spiritual practice that we do like meditation or going to church and things like that, that we can actually live with empathy. And if we live with empathy, then that means the door is open. And that means there's a constant flow of passion and action that we have with each other. So, in an evolutionary scale, 100 years from now, if empathy does become something that's taught in the school system and things like that, then we are headed toward a higher sense of unity and a higher sense of oneness.
Yeah, if we have that door closed, and if we're not perceiving others, we're going to be in our own world, and there's a lot of blocks. I guess one of the things we could also talk about, it's like, what's keeping that door from opening? It's the squeaky hinge, it's the fear of what's, I don't want to open that door. It might be dangerous, or somebody might come in and hurt me, or they might, make fun of me or whatever. So it's kind of like, there's a whole thing of those blocks to that door kind of opening. And so, yeah, that's what I'm kind of seeing is we need to find ways of opening that door and learning those skills. Oil the hinges. Maybe the door is stuck. They got painted over. How doors, you get paint and it gets stuck. You got to break it. And you do it gently. So and you need the key. So you need a key too. What's the key?
Yeah.
And so I guess I kind of see it that you open the door and then you connect, and then, oh, there I see you. and then the peace is when we kind of have this, non-fearful, connected relationship that kind of builds. And there's a
Right.
there's a quote that I really love by Johann Galtung, who I'm sure you're very familiar with, who started a lot of these peace and conflict studies. And he says, peace is resolving conflict with empathy, nonviolence, and creativity, and it's a never-ending process.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
it's like we have to.
As long as we have needs, and as long as we are within Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's going to be conflict. Conflict's always with us. It's how we approach conflict. And in my own life, I do sort of hibernate, and the idea of I was very fortunate and was able to semi-retire at a very early age. So it's easy for me to stay away from people, and that's not good at all. It's the idea of going out there and connecting and things like that that influences my work. And so the idea of keeping the doors open, not only through the internet but also in face-to-face activity, volunteer activities, is very important to all of us. And that just we're able to escape the isolation, and that's good for us, but it's also good for other people because you engage them and they're able to lessen their fear.
Yeah, it's being inside the doors without having any opening is kind of a lonely experience. And
yeah, absolutely. So I think what you're doing is great because I think it foretells of a time in the future when some of these doors that are closed to us now, basically because of an evolutionary track that we're on, some of those doors will completely disappear, and we're already seeing it. The iPhones and the iPads and the computers and Skype and Facebook and all of that is opening a huge amount of doors for us. And the idea of downtowns becoming places where people congregate rather than just selling goods. All of these things are leading to a rejection of isolation and an embracing of the idea of empathy.
Oh, I forgot to ask. I've been adding a new question about the metaphors. Is you were talking about a door opening, and that's kind of like a individualistic kind of a picture, right? What does a whole culture of empathy look like? If you think of the whole world culture, maybe scaling up your door metaphor, what does that look like?
Well, right now we have seen over the last couple of years, 2011 was a watershed year in world history. There were so many different doors opening that we can't even grapple with them. We have no idea how to get to the next step because all these doors were just flung open. Not only just Arab Spring, but everywhere these doors were being flung open. So we don't have the tools to be able to deal with that because we're still in 2010. When 2011 happened, it was a revolution. It was a revolution in human consciousness, and I think that the next 30 years before there's another watershed year and watershed revolution, we're going to be dealing with that and trying to understand how to keep those doors open, what to do when you are face to face with these other people, and the dictators fall. But what do you do when you have a dictator and then you have the same political structure in place? You have elections, but you elect the same people. All of these things are going to be worked out over the next 30 years or so, based on this watershed changing consciousness that we had last year in 2011.
So what you're kind of saying is a worldwide culture of empathy is all these doors kind of opening all over, but that, hey, this is kind of scary. People don't know how to keep these doors open. There's like all this,
right.
It
Yeah.
creates a lot of chaos and a lot of
Yeah.
fear and a lot of,
Yeah.
kind of.
And it just not. We haven't visualized what the next phase is going to be. Hegel and all the philosophers over time said, "Hey, one thing you can depend on is change." And so what we're doing is we're saying, "Oh, well, let's see, what is it? Capitalism, or is it socialism, or is it state capitalism, or is it free enterprise socialism? What is this?" So we're still grappling with this terminology. So I'm working on some things now to try to visualize what a post-capitalist, post-socialist world will look like. And that is one of peace, and that's one of empathy, and that's one where we take the best of what we have and move on with it, but we also let some of the barriers and some of the closed doors of the past drop away. And that is how we make progress as human beings.
Well, I was in Russia, Soviet Union, like just after the changes there, and people were lost. It's like they didn't know. It's like they were in this very tightly controlled system, totalitarian. It was falling apart, and people they were saying, "What is this free market? What is this democracy?" So that's, for me, that was like a lived experience of feeling their confusion about not knowing, not having integrated, not having the experience of these doors opening, and then we saw everybody started shutting the door again, to a degree. So it's like, what does it take? It's like somehow we got to be able to open those doors, but to do it in a skillful way and have the skills to do it. I guess I'm kind of like, one of the things that we need is the intention. It's like, why do we want to open the door? It's like, what's the vision that we have of, what does the world look like when the doors are open,
Yeah.
And then
exactly.
maybe like a vocabulary to even talk about it, because I'm finding, people don't quite know even how to talk about it. They don't have the tools and the vocabulary for even talking about it.
Absolutely. This happens all the time. There's cyclical revolutions in history. And when the revolution happened, people say, wouldn't it be great? And then it happens, and people are still trying to figure out what the next world will look like. And I think that that's what we're doing right now. And, it's happening. I mean, it's not as if somebody has to do something. We're all doing it. And the technology is changing, the way we look at politics, even our faith-based practices are changing. So all of these things are moving into a new era. And I think it makes some people uncomfortable with it, but it's very enlivening for those of us who, want to move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that's coming to me, the other part that I'm really trying to understand for myself is the nature of nonviolence, in the sense that if we have kind of this conflict between people, and then you say, well, I'm not going to be violent in the conflict, but I'm going to use these nonviolent means of confrontation. And I've seen people kind of do that, but they don't do it in a way where they're empathizing with people who are using violence. Do you know what I mean? It's
Right,
something I've been really looking at. And I find that there's not a real dialogue. It's like I would rather use empathic means, and I don't quite know what that would look like in a conflict situation, but that it would be empathizing with people who you might consider being the perpetrator, the police, the city, the dictators and whatnot.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts about that in terms of...
Well, I may not have amazing thoughts, but Nelson Mandela does.
Uh-huh.
So I'll talk a little bit about him for a second. The idea of seeing your enemy, your perceived enemy, as someone that is like you, and that the idea when apartheid was in place in South Africa, there were two sides in that, but both of them were oppressed, And Nelson Mandela, who started as as a person who chose armed conflict, that's why he was in prison. He was arrested in an armed confrontation. When he was in prison, he came upon the writings of Gandhi and Thoreau, and became not an adherent of nonviolence. He understood what it meant. And here's what he said: "It was during those long and lonely years that my hunger for the freedom of my own people became a hunger for the freedom of all people, white and black. I knew, as I knew anything, that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed, for all had been robbed of humanity. When I walked out of prison, that was my mission, to liberate the oppressed and the oppressor both." So that is the highest level of empathy, where you spend all that time in prison, you're brutalized, your people are brutalized, and you see the people who are oppressing you as part of the oppression. And that, the virtue, I believe, that Nelson Mandela had was the ability to forgive. And that had to do with empathy, of course. But that forgiveness allowed him to come up with this idea. It wasn't his alone, but it came up with the idea of reconciliation, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that gave South Africa a means of releasing from the isolation and the anger and the vengeance. So, the idea of empathy changed the world in those early 1990s.
Well, I keep trying to work that into the metaphor. So what we get is a lot of times there's these revolutions, right? It's like
prison.
Yeah,
they open the door.
But yeah, people open the door, but then it's like you've been suppressing me. You've been keeping my door closed. I can't see and be seen. You kind of use violence to like open the door, and then you push the other guy, make them close their door, right? And then you think, hey, I've got it. If I just have them close their door, then I'll have all this space and all this, the light will come in and I'll feel happy and all that kind of stuff. But then those people with the door closed, they're like saying, I'm not happy here. I'm going to see about closing your door, And
it has to be for everyone. It has to be for everyone.
So it's like we have to say we're going to open the door for everyone. So a culture of empathy is where everyone's door is open, and that we create the environment where people feel safe to have their doors open, and that we encourage people who have their doors closed to say, hey, I want to see your humanity of what you have behind those closed doors. And it's safe to do it because this is what we value.
Yeah, I think, the justifications and the rationalizations for inaction, I've got mine. There's nothing I can do in this world. I can't make a difference. All of those things, those are all based in fear. Because until we're able to open the door for everyone, none of us can be outside of our prisons. And this isn't to say that I'm negative or, I see the world, with half cup instead of half full, half empty, half full. This is just a recognition that until we are able to stop the rapes in the Congo, until we're able to stop the the idea of resources that we go in and we take from other countries, until we stop all of these things that lead to anger and violence and war, it comes home to roost. We are absorbing that as human beings, and until we can free everyone, we're not going to be free ourselves. And that's going to take a long, long time in our history, but I think that we'll be there because we've made a lot of progress so far, even though there's a lot of statistics that say that we haven't made progress. There's been a lot of books being written right now that say we actually have made huge amounts of progress.
Yeah, so those doors have been opening over kind of through the history, and some people say, they're more open now than they ever were.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's
Yeah,
kind of a long ways to go with,
there is. Yeah.
and to see the humanity in the Congo, the people who are suffering and the people who are maybe inflicting suffering too. How do you see that? Both
Yeah, yeah.
humanity.
You have, you know, uh, it's interesting to see all of the people you associate with violence, the mafia people and the warlords and all of those people. Then they go home to their families and they feel love.
Yeah,
And that's the there's a that's a glimmer of hope that even Hitler, you know, I'm not sure if he loved his mother, but he probably loved his mother. But I think that the idea is that everyone is capable of it, and there's things preventing us from having empathy with other people. But as we move beyond that, I think people will rely on anger and violence less at that point.
well, do you see have you kind of looked into the nonviolence and the techniques and kind of the underlying methodologies and
Right.
dynamics of it? Because that's
Yeah.
something I'm trying to understand. It's like, oh, what is that? Can you show me that again?
That's the book.
Oh, you're
This is actually the elements of peace. How nonviolence works. That's the name of the book.
oh, okay.
So there's 30 methods. There's 30 methods of nonviolence, and basically it covers the gambit. How different people work in different situations. So each one of them has a case history attached to it. Each one of them has a method. Each one of them has a virtue attached. Each one of them has a story. So there are quite a few. Whether people are out on the streets for the Occupy movement, or whether they're pacifists writing letters about a world without nuclear weapons, whether they're environmentalists planting trees, all of those are nonviolent methods. We have to co-opt our activities. Right now, most of our activities are under this umbrella of Darwinian violence. And even though Darwin wasn't a Darwinian, the idea has been taken that we're all against each other and it's a zero-sum game, but really it's not. Gandhi said, there's much more love in the world than there is quarrels. And I think that that's what we have to keep in mind. We really do have to keep in mind that 99% of most of our lives are spent in peace activities. And very, very little in this world is under the domain of violence. And we're trying to move that into even smaller area.
So we just wanted to bring the conversation to a close.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad you're doing what you're doing, because I think the idea of the virtues of peace is very important to me, and I think that as long as we keep in mind that everybody brings something different to the table, then we can start to have more empathy with people. Everyone is not perfect. Everyone is not 100% friendly. Everyone is not 100%. An initiator, honest, things like that. But what we do is we bring our individual characteristics together. I think empathy gives us an open door to other people. It not only allows us to look out, but also for other people to communicate what they have to give to the world. And I think that that the virtuosos of peace are everyone, because we all bring something to the table. Empathy gives us the ability to see other people and have it influence us, and we can influence them. So it's great what you're doing, bringing this virtue out.
Well, thank you for joining me in all the work you've been doing too with your website.
Thank you. Yeah, International Cities of Peace is going very, very strong. I would encourage people. International Cities of Peace initiatives have been starting all over the world. It's complementary to your current work, and it just gives you another platform for working within your community. A lot of people are just small groups within a community, but They bring in the city government, the mayor, the city council, and then it starts to become come on the agenda of the school systems, and that's really where we need to be. We need to find another way to talk about the virtues of peace and empathy in the school systems for the new era.
Okay, well, great. Well, let's keep in touch and hope to keep working together on building these mutual movements of empathy and peace.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Fred.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.